Hey there everybody, it's Mike DiLisio with another solo mode review. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Vengeance from designer Gordon Kaleha and publisher Mighty Boards Games. Vengeance is a dice rolling game, a game where you are trying to kind of solve a puzzle every turn where you're going through this den and trying to take out a bunch of thugs and minions and big bosses of people that have harmed you. It's a revenge style game, like those old revenge movies where you've been harmed in some way and now you're going to exact your revenge on those horrible people who have wronged you. And so what I'm going to do is head on over to the table in just a moment and show you the difference in components, any differences in the components between the solo variant and the traditional mode. We're going to talk a little bit about how the gameplay changes, and then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to give you my final thoughts on the game. So with that being said, let's head on over to the table and take a look at Vengeance. Okay, here you see a little bit of a setup of the solo game of Vengeance. I don't have it completely set up. I'm just giving you a very high-level overview of how the game is played. I'm not going to go into a tremendous rules explanation, especially in this solo variant. So what I really want to focus on first are any components. Is there anything that's added or removed? Well, the main difference is that the back of all of the player boards, and here are the different characters that you can play in the game. The back of all of the player boards have the solo setup for that particular character. So, for example, if I were playing as Shadow Man, the runner, what I do is I look on the back, and it's going to tell you how to set up for the solo game. It also gives you a nice little bit of kind of backstory for your particular character. It tells you what deck of vengeance cards you're going to have for yourself. It tells you what's going to be in the boss card deck, which are then going to be placed out in these dens. And then it also tells you how you are being wronged. It tells you which 3 of these thugs are going to be wronging you at the beginning of the game. And so that's really the main difference in components, is that you're looking at the back of these boards to show you how to set it up. Otherwise, the components are the same as for the traditional game. Now, as far as gameplay, what changes? Well, there's a couple of changes. First of all, in this first phase, which is the wronging phase, in the multiplayer game, you would be doing a draft, and you don't do that here. What it does is it tells you right on the back of the sheet of your board here what your 3 starting vengeance cards are going to be. These are the people that are wronging you, and you're going to be trying to exact your revenge through the game. And so you get those 3 cards, which I have right here, and they're going to kind of tell you how to start off your board. So you see, for example, here, Banda Boy. He's going to be doing some nail removal. That does not sound pleasant. It says 1 broken and 1 hurt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of these red cubes and I'm going to put it on the leftmost spot in broken, which we see here. Then I'm going to take one and put it in hurt. This is going to be affecting different aspects of the game. And then the next card, it says bad trip. Do 1 stress. So I place 1 on the stress. This is going to be affecting my dice pool, among other things. And then this last one says bashing. 2 hurt. So I do 2 more on the hurt track. And so I'm already pretty hurt, somewhat broken, and a little bit stressed out. I'm not going to make that look really pretty, but you get the general idea. So this is setting you up for the game, and these are also your starting 3 vengeance cards. I'm sorry. You're starting 3 vengeance cards, and these are going to be ways that you could potentially gain points throughout the game. All right? So that's the first difference, and really the most significant difference with gameplay in the solo game. You are really going to be doing what you normally would do throughout the game, which is that you're going to be going through these acts. You're going to be going through montage phases and combat phases, okay? This turn tracker here lays it out for you. Some acts you're going to have, well, actually only on the first act will you have 1 combat phase. In the second and third act, you're going to have 2 combat phases after your montage. And so this is set up kind of like one of those action vengeance movies where you get wronged, some bad people do bad things to you. Then you've got a montage phase where you are building up your abilities, you're building up your skills. Maybe you are learning how to pull off the reverse blade. Maybe you have a knife throw ability that you've learned, and they would show you that in the montage. Maybe you've picked up some brass knuckles along the way, okay? These are all things that you can do to kind of add, and you already start with a skill. In my case, Shadow Man starts with a parkour skill. These are all dice manipulation. These are all ways to manipulate the dice that you're going to be using once you go into one of these dens. And so when you go into the combat phase, you're going to pick a particular den. Let's say, for example, I was going into the pits here. It shows me my starting areas here. Here's my starting mini. Each character has a mini. It would go into that starting area, and then it started with some things populated, different types of minions. I'd flip this card over. Now, potentially earlier, I could have done some recon to find out who was there first, and I find out that Banda Boy is kind of the boss here. And so I'm going to have to try to take out all of these minions and Banda Boy, and he would also have some additional kind of thugs that go in there. The different minions all act a little bit differently. This little card kind of gives an overview of the different ways that they fight. Also, the different gangs all have different abilities. So this is from the Lords gang. The Lords resolve this action before they take any hero action, so they're going to be able to kind of get a jump on you. So you're rolling dice, and I'm not going to go into this too much, but let's say here I look at my mind, it's just 3 dice. I'm rolling dice. Actually, before I'd done this, I would have used some of these cards. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, just kind of showing you the overview here. This is how I would have gotten some abilities by playing ability cards. I would have been able to heal myself potentially, get some of this hurt off of me, or potentially get some of that mind back so that not only am I using 3 dice, but now that S means that I can set one of these to any side that I want, maybe a side that can let me do some recon that I mentioned in before. So basically, you are doing things to get you some upgraded skills, some upgraded abilities, and then you go in and you fight, and you try to take out these different henchmen, you try to take out these people that have avenged you, that have harmed you, that you're getting your vengeance on. And the ultimate goal is to get all the way through these acts and to fulfill objectives. And so each solo character has a objective card, okay? And in this case, my objectives are, number 1, to kill Roxy Queen, who is the leader of the Lord's gang, and to finish the run with no more than 4 stress cubes on the mine track, all right? That's it. In this particular character, there's no other additional rules because this is considered the starting solo character. Start with this first. And then you not only have these objectives that you need to win, you look at the victory point levels, okay? You survived at 16 plus, you got vengeance at 24 plus, and overkill at 32 plus. So it gives you some things to work on besides the objectives. Different solo characters are going to have different missions, some of them more involved and complex than others, some with additional rules. So you can see, as you learn the game and as you maybe get better at it, there are some additional challenges that can be brought forth. That is a very, very high-level overview of how Vengeance, the solo game, is played. Now, let's head on over and find out what my final thoughts are for Vengeance. Okay, hopefully that gives you a good idea on how the solo variant of Vengeance is played. I want to talk a little bit about my solo experience, what I feel the solo experience is for the game. One of the things I like to talk about is win conditions, because as a solo gamer, and I know many others, prefer to have a clear win-loss condition as opposed to a beat your high score variant. And thankfully, Vengeance does have a clear win-loss condition. Each character has certain conditions, certain missions, so to speak, that they need to fulfill to win. And I like objectives as a win condition in solo games. Sometimes you're playing against a clear AI and you have to beat their score. If you can't have that, having objectives is a great way to handle a clear win-loss condition. And that's the route that Vengeance goes, and it makes sense. Not only do you have those objectives, and they're going to be different depending on which character you have, which is really good for replayability, but it also gives you some score thresholds so that if you did complete your objectives, you could see how well you did. And maybe you're going to try to do even better. Even if you were successful and you won, you're going to try to do a little bit better on the next time you go through with that particular character. I do really like having different objectives for different characters. It allows you to have a little bit of an exploration of the decision space, because when it comes down to it, there's not a huge amount of decision space in the game. Really, you're choosing upgrades, you're rolling dice, you're choosing which dice to keep, you're choosing which cards to play, you're kind of solving a little puzzle every time you run into one of those rooms, but there's not a huge amount of decision space. And so having those objectives gives you another thing to think about, and I think that that's a really good thing. The other thing I like to talk about is the setup and teardown. And honestly, that's going to be the biggest negative I have for Vengeance, is that this is a big box game with a tremendous amount of components. A lot of cardboard, a lot of cards, a lot of minis. And while that's not always a problem, the game itself, as far as the actual decisions you're making, is a pretty small scope game. There's not, as I just mentioned, not a whole lot of decisions that you're making in the game. And so when you have that and you pair it with a game that takes a significant amount of time to set up and tear down, that can be off-putting to many players, many solo players. And it honestly has probably kept me from playing the game as much as I would, because, as I'll talk about in a moment, I do enjoy the experience of playing the game. However, I think there's a bit of a disconnect there between the amount of time that it takes to set it up and tear it down, and the amount of components that you have to manipulate, and the amount of actual decisions you're making in the game. All of those minis, which look cool, don't get me wrong, could just as easily have been tokens, and that probably would have aided, or tracks even, that probably would have aided with the speed of setup and teardown. So that's something you do have to keep in mind. You see this big, huge game with a ton of components, you may be expecting a slightly different experience than the one that the game actually provides. The next thing I want to talk about is rules. This is also a slight negative for me. The rules are there. They are generally complete, but I don't think that they are laid out in a way that is intuitive. I felt like the first few times I played this game solo, I had a number of questions, and I had to refer back to the book, and there were some things that felt like they were ambiguities that I went online to try to kind of clear up. And so I do think that the rule set could be clearer. I do think that it could be organized a bit better. I believe it's all there. I believe that everything you need to know to play the game is there. It's just not necessarily in a user-friendly format. And so I do wish that the rules were a little bit more concise, more cleared up, more focused to what it takes to get this game out, get it on the table, because there's already a lot that you have to kind of manipulate. A clearer rule set would have helped with that. All right, so overall, what do I think? Now, I know I've just mentioned some negatives, and there are some significant negatives. The setup is an issue. The rules are a bit of an issue. But there's one thing that I cannot deny, which is that every single time that I sit down to play this game solo, I have a blast. There is just something about the theme of this game being carried through the mechanics that really hit a sweet spot for me. And I can't exactly, I'm going to try to articulate what it is. Very often you'll have games that feature action, okay? And a lot of times that action is represented or abstracted through speed. You're rolling dice fast, and maybe there's a timed element to the game. I don't particularly love that way of abstracting action. Yeah, it gets your heart rate going, and it gets you worried and anxious, but that's just not, for me, what I really look for in an action game. This game pulls off action, but gives it to you in a puzzle, all right? So I don't feel frantic when I play the game, but I definitely feel like I am looking at what I've got in front of me. I've got this room that I've got to neutralize. I've got to neutralize all of these enemies, get to that big boss, and take them out. And how am I going to do it with the skills that I have, the skills that I've built up in those earlier montage phases of the game, my new abilities and my new skills, and the dice that represent what abilities and strengths and weaknesses that I have. How am I going to utilize those strengths? How am I going to mitigate those weaknesses? It really carries through. That theme carries through. Every time that I enter that fight phase, I really feel like I am running into that room, trying to take out these baddies, trying to do the best I can with what I have. And it always feels like an overwhelming me against the world type thing. And that's what this game is really trying to evoke, and I think it does a really good job of that. There are obviously some flaws that I've mentioned earlier in the game, but the overall experience that I have when I play Vengeance is such that I just have to say I enjoy it. I have fun. Now, is it a great value for money? Probably not, because as I said before, it's a small scale game in a big box with a lot of minis, and that's going to drive the price up. So you have to take a lot of things into consideration when you are looking at whether Vengeance is a game for you. Value is a consideration. Setup and teardown is a consideration. How willing are you to struggle through maybe a slightly clunky rule set? I happen to think that all of those things considered, the experience that I get out of it is worth those elements that I wish were slightly better. It's not a slam dunk. It could be. I feel like this game is this close to being just tremendous. But to me, I still recommend the game. I give Vengeance a 7 out of 10. Thank you so much for your time as always, and have a great day.